My name is Clarke Iakovakis. I'm the Scholarly Services Librarian here at OSU. And so part of my role is to work with you to help make your research more visible, more accessible, and also to kind of help with the project management side of things. Kay helps with that as well. So the Open Science Framework, that's what the focus is today. And this is really a workflow management tool that helps you stay organized as you're working on a research project, and then makes it easier to share some of the products of the research when the project is finished or during the projects. So if you have any questions as we go along, you can feel free to ask. I will leave some time here and there for Q&A, but if anything comes to mind, just feel free to raise your hand and ask. So kind of outline for how things are going to go today. We're going to start off with the PowerPoint. We're going to talk about what OSF is, who the Center for Open Science is, and what their rationale was for developing the Open Science Framework. And then we're going to go live and we're going to go into the OSF, and I'm going to show you around all of the different parts, kind of how it works. And then at the end, we'll spend a little bit talking about how we can help going from this point forward. So let's talk about the Center for Open Science. It is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, all right? So it is entirely funded by grants. These grants come from federal agencies like the NIH, NSF, also comes from private foundations. And a lot of these foundations, like the Lauren and John Arnold Foundation, they fund studies for replication of cancer biology. The Gates Foundation, the Sloan Foundation also fund a lot of research. So the reason that these funders are putting their money into the OSF is because since they do fund so many research studies, it helps them if the products of that research are made available, right? Like, so there's a lot that goes into the making of a research project, much more than just the article at the end. So it's in their interest to support making all of those research materials available, not only so that more people can access them, but also because if they're not funding duplicate studies, so if someone comes along and has a similar study, they can point them in the direction of this study and say, take a look at their data, their workflow, their materials, and maybe you can branch off from that. Maybe you can run analysis on data that they've already collected. So that's their interest in supporting the Center for Open Science. It's a mission-driven organization, and what that means is they state their mission is to increase the openness, integrity, and reproducibility of research. So what that means is they don't monetize anything. All of their tools are entirely free and open source. There's no hidden accounts. There's not, if you pay more, you unlock these features. Everything is completely free and really unmoderated in terms of them governing what you do within the platform itself. It is run, it's a tech company, so it's run by software developers, but it's really run by researchers who have done research themselves. So PhDs, faculty members, graduate students who have experience doing research, running labs, being on research teams, and they're really driven by this mission to increase the openness of all products of research. The website's simple, osf.io. They call it a scholarly commons to connect the entire research cycle. And you hear this Open Science, Center for Open Science, and they use that term science, but really the tool is designed to be discipline agnostic. So it provides a very high level structure that whether you're in social sciences or the humanities, whatever sort of data that you're collecting, if you're doing research and you have multiple files and multiple different parts, then the OSF is a great option for getting organized. All right, let's dig a little bit deeper and go into the rationale and model for the OSF. So their idea is to start with where researchers are now. Like, we all have our own personal workflows, our own ways that we're currently doing things, our own tools that we're already using. So they're not saying we're going to go in and invent this tool that completely disrupts everything you're doing if you only put all your eggs into this basket. It's really designed to integrate with the workflows that you already have and the tools that you're already using. So their approach is to provide solutions for this project management while at the same time maximizing the openness, integrity, and reproducibility of that research. Everything you create in OSF is private by default, okay? So even though it says Open Science Framework, there's no obligation to share publicly anything that you do in OSF. So the Center for Open Science, they developed this as a tool for managing your own data and your materials for your own use. And their theory is that if they can increase the efficiency of that and provide you incentives with making that available after you're completed, then that furthers their mission. Does that make sense? All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the goals of openness, spend just a bit of time on this because that's kind of their intent. You can characterize their goals of openness in 3 different ways. So first we have open access, and that typically refers to the peer-reviewed article, right? Or the book chapter or the book. This reports on the outcomes, like what were the findings, maybe some summary tables and plots, how it fits with existing research. Most of that published literature is paywalled. This is a plot of literature over the last 20 years. All of the gray is that which is closed or behind paywalls. So you can see that the amount of open access to the published literature is increasing over the last 20 years, but there's still kind of, and signs, there's still ways that we can further that. But the article is not the research, right? It's a report about the research. It's what went into the research findings. The research is the data, the materials, and the protocols, and so on. And making that more available is one way of improving the reproducibility of the work because you can see what the researchers did. So still here too with data availability. One study on zoology found that out of a set of 516 articles going back 2 decades, they contacted the authors to see if they could get their hands on the data. So first of all, tracking down the authors was a challenge. They weren't able to find or contact most of them. And they found that for every yearly increase in article age, the odds of the data set being reported as extant decreased by 17%. And even among those authors that did answer back, the proportion of data sets that still existed dropped from 100% in 2011 to 33% in 1991. So many of these missing data sets could only be retrieved with considerable effort. You know, they're on a hard drive somewhere. I don't know what, file type it is. And the rest are just lost to science. And there is kind of this idea that there's a reproducibility crisis in the sciences and social sciences. 90% of respondents to a Nature survey found that they agreed there's a reproducibility crisis. There's an increasing number of retractions, failures to replicate high-profile studies, and there's different causes for this: mechanized reporting of statistical results and a publication bias towards statistically significant results. So a technology isn't going to solve this, but what they're hoping is that if we can change research practices and sort of change the culture by changing the process and during the workflow, then maybe we can reverse some of this tide. Skip that. There's one more type of openness. So we've talked about open access to the findings, open access to the research, but there's also the workflows. So how are the outcomes and data generated? How did we apply our analysis strategy in order to draw our inferences? And this remains largely invisible. Like, it's in emails, it's in notebooks written down, and a lot of people never see it except for those who were involved in the research project itself. So true reproducibility can only happen if we know really the process that was followed from the very early beginnings of the research project all the way through to the end. And so what the Open Science Framework tries to address is all 3 of these. Any questions? It's very high level. I promise I'm going to get into the specifics. Okay, we'll go into the tool. Yes, go ahead. Uh-huh.
So just to make sure that I understood the idea, so this Open Science Framework will give me the opportunity to access to data, for instance, which are the same as my own interest. And is it, like, can I do it wherever, like, where I am, or should I be here in the US to have access to this?
Great question. So OSF is entirely a web-based platform, so there's no software to download. If someone creates an OSF project and makes it public, it's live on the web. All you have to do is access that project and whatever materials they have chosen to make public, whether it's their data set or their materials or just their preprint maybe of their publication, you can download. And they'll have terms of usage that you can apply and say, you may use this as long as you do the following, you know, give attribution and so on, then you'll have access to it.
So if I find an article and I would like to download it, should I need the approval of the author?
No, when that author turns their project public, then they attach a license to it and say that anyone can download this and use it, and they can cite it as long as they give me attribution. And there may be different terms for their data set. You know, it may be a good practice to get in touch with that author and say, you know, any questions that you have about the data set, but you don't need permission to extract stuff out of the open science framework. It's entirely open once it's public.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Yes?
This is something, you know, maybe you'll get into later, but is it completely web-based, or it's an app that you can download and then work off the laptop or the machine?
It's completely web-based. There's no offline standalone version.
Okay.
Yes?
I'm not sure if I got the part where you're talking about the incentive of them.
Right. What's their incentive for making things open? And that's partly what they're trying to address, is there's not a whole lot of extrinsic incentive for making your data available, right? You get credit for publishing, especially in a high impact factor journal, but there's no actual incentive in terms of career, promotion, or funding. It varies. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I make a comment?
Please.
So, you know, NSF, NIH, these days, they require data management platforms, right? So I think I see this as, like, you know, one very good way of managing data. Like, you know, NSF requires you to have the data at least for 5 years after the project expires. So, like, you know, now you have the data. And I think the other advantage I see is that, you know, many of us are in the situation that your students have done the work, they leave. So out goes most of the protocols, because, like, you know, they did something in getting a result, and you only see the final number.
Right.
You're like, you know, sometimes you struggle to get what exactly was done, especially, like, you know, when we do simulations, there are a lot of, you know, sort of black magic that, quote unquote.
Right.
But yeah, I think, like, you know, it's a good way of documenting everything and having it public, or at least to your group members. And maybe there's a selective option that you can share only to X, Y, Z.
Yes, we'll go into that. You can add collaborators and give them various levels of read-write permissions. Yes?
What I was trying to ask is more like, you said it's a tech company. So I was thinking about what is their incentive, the foundation's incentive
right.
to make this thing.
From what they've stated publicly, their intent is to increase the reproducibility of science. Like, so they see that there's lots of issues with being able to validate research findings. And so their stated intent is to increase the integrity of science. And it's run by researchers who care about furthering science and social science and humanities, any research as a field. And that's what their stated intent is. Yeah. Any other questions? Hey, Kathy?
I just want to confirm, if it's in here, if it's in Open Science Framework, it is attribution.
That's right.
Unless so they don't specifically have a license on it, we just know because it's in here.
There is a license on that creators of OSF projects can attach to a given project and say this is a Creative Commons license, the project itself. Now, if there are certain products in there, like say you have a preprint that you want to keep the copyright to, you can put that on the document itself.
Okay. If nothing is on the document, then it's a CC BY.
That's, the creator has to go in and select a license. And I'll show you what some of those options are. CC BY is one of them. There are several other open source software licenses like GNU Public License and that sort of thing. So the way that they're addressing this is there's a problem, and that problem is I've lost stuff. So what OSF tries to do is help you find work that you did earlier for your own use. So here's an example. A student comes to a lab and says, oh, I have this idea for a research project, and you say, someone else was working on something similar, but they graduated. We have their data and folders and files somewhere. Let me email them. They send you a zip file. It's got 15 different data sets on there with different file names, really loosely described methodology and protocols. Who has it? Where is it stored? What are the most current versions? You hit the nail on the head. So where is it? And then making sense of it. What was the research question again? What's the most common, the most recent version? Again, coming back to this slide, OSF is private by default, but it's meant to help you manage your own data and materials for your own use. So the way that they address this is OSF can be multiple different things. It can be looked at as a content management system, a place to have multiple different components, multiple different types of content in one system. The collaboration platform, because you can add multiple different people to a project and give them various levels of read-write permissions as the project develops. Every file uploaded into OSF is version controlled. So you can go back and look at previous versions. You can see who changed it, what changes they made. Actually, you can't see what changes they made within the platform itself. It's not, there's not like a diff checker or like a as robust of a system for version control as like GitHub has, but it does have a version control. So you can retrieve anything. It's a repository, a place to put stuff in and get stuff out. It's also a registry. I'm not going to talk about this too much now, but it's a way for, if you're just embarking on a research study, you can pre-register it and have a frozen version saying, this is my research questions, this is the data I'm going to be collecting, these are the expected hypotheses. And that way, if there are lots of other people who are working on a similar project, you have a fixed record on the internet that states that you came in at this point in time. That's time-stamped.
So when you say it's a repository,
right.
Is there a storage limit?
No, and that's the amazing thing is that, I'll get into this, there is a cap on file size, 5 gigabytes. So it's not the place for huge data unless you're breaking it up. But there's no limits in terms of a given project can have as much space as you want. And you as a user, if you have multiple projects in OSF, you have no file size caps or no limits on that, storage caps, right? Yeah. Okay. So with the understanding that OSF is meant to fit into your existing workflow, one of the major ways that it does that is to connect to services that you already use. And one of the major sources of loss and error is transitioning between services, right? So you have your initial thoughts on something that might be in an email or a notebook, or you wrote it down somewhere. Then you have the data that you generate or you collect. That's on a hard drive or on Google Drive or somewhere. You import it into some analytics tool, write some scripts. Then those have to be stored somewhere, maybe on GitHub or Bitbucket. Then you get your data, your figures, where do all of those go? And then you start writing the document and you have tons of different versions of the document and so on. So OSF is meant to go in and out of each of these services and have them all integrate in a single place. And it connects them together using their APIs. So when you connect, say, your Google Drive or your GitHub, you authenticate with that service, and then it gives you different permissions depending on the service. Like with Google Drive, you can import all of your files from a given folder, and then from within OSF, you can add or delete files, you can change files. So different services have different levels of permissions in terms of what you can do, but it's meant to bring everything together in a central place. You can therefore be more efficient, and as a byproduct, the workflow becomes more reproducible You can go back and trace what you did at each step of the research process because it's all documented within OSF. And we're gonna look at how to do this and what that all means, but does anyone have any questions? This is where they are now. They have a different image, which I had at first, but I deleted. I should have kept, where it's all filled in and they have lots of other services that they're currently working on to connect with their API. But this is, at this moment in time, where it is. I don't think Papers is included right now, but I think that's on their projected list. Do you have a question?
So is it like the materials are getting imported
Mm-hmm.
from Google Drive?
Well, yeah, they are. So I'll show you, when we go live, it'll make a little bit more sense and I'll show you what it looks like, okay? But yes, you are essentially able to edit the document itself in OSF and then add those changes to your Google Drive and it will change in your Google Drive.
So you can make this kind of sync with
Yes, exactly. And it's the same with GitHub. So if you have someone on your research team who is contributing code but isn't on Git, well, they can contribute their code. They can then upload their version into OSF, and that will go onto the master branch in the GitHub repository. So it doesn't support a lot of robust branching and forking like GitHub does, but it, at least at a basic level, allows you to work within the system. Any other questions? I think, okay. I did want to make another comment. Let me see where I'm at in time. Good. About preservation, right? So we're going to invest all of this, and this is a tech startup, nonprofit, and then it's going to go out of business, and then we've just lost everything. So there's a few different ways that they work against that. It's open source, which means that if all of a sudden they go out, someone else can install the source code and install their own standing OSF, basically. They do have a robust backup using, they have checksums and they have distributed servers across the world that they keep everything. They don't lock you in. So because they're a nonprofit organization, it's not in their business interest to make your data hard to get out of it. So it's super easy. If you just want to get everything out, delete everything and deactivate your account, you can. You're not like locked in for a certain period of time. Again, as I mentioned, they integrate well with other services. And then this one, in their first year of operation, they set aside $250,000 as what they call their preservation fund. So if they do, all of a sudden, something catastrophic happens, they lose all their funding, go out of business, they'll use this money to keep like a frozen in time version of OSF running as long as that money lasts. So you'll at least be able to get everything out of it. It won't just go dark and disappear one day, is what they say. And then finally, to hit on this idea of nonprofit, like what's their incentive, what are they in it for? They see their role as building a public goods infrastructure to connect all of these services, including the commercial ones, together, and to reduce the distance between all of these different services and your workflow, with the hopes that eventually you'll make that work openly available. They're non-competitive, which means they're not trying to compete with Google Drive or be another GitHub. They're complementary to those. And being nonprofit avoids a conflict of interest. So they're not like mining your data and selling it to people or monetizing it. They're like protective and secure of it.
So you just mentioned that they have these backups all around the world. And if I'm doing some, what do you call it? Export violation control research.
Yes.
How does that play in if I were to put something in here?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be the best place for all types of data, like sensitive data, data that you may not want, even the slightest potential of getting hacked, then just keep it off. Did you have anything to say about that?
We talked about this. This is
Yeah.
Something you do want to think about.
Yeah, so definitely consider, you know that once you put something on their servers, it's on their servers, and they have their guarantees that they're not selling it, that they're doing the best they can to keep it secure, that it's not being mined and so on, but it's just something to think about. And be sure, you know, if you are working on a study where you do have a, in the IRB, you say, my data is going to be kept wherever, that if you do adopt OSF, that you go back and modify your IRB to reflect the other places that your data is going to be stored. Okay, any other questions? We're about to finally get into OSF. All right. So their website is osf.io, pretty easy. And you don't have to follow along with me. Really, I'm going to quickly go through some of my projects that I already have set up and some pre-existing ones. So you're welcome if you do want to follow along. But it's also meant for you to just kind of watch and get a sense of how it works. And then later on, if you want some sit-down one-on-one help and, okay, I know you did this, but I'm not sure how you did it, or can I do this, then I'm happy to do that. So you can sign in up at the top, and OSU actually has an institutional login for OSF. So you can create an account with them, or you can click on the sign in through institution and select OSU. Agree to the terms, and the terms are there if you want to read them. And it didn't ask me to put in my OSU credentials because I just did this right before the class, and I guess it saved the cookies. But normally when you do that, it'll prompt you to log in with your OSU credentials. And what that means is OSU has an institutional page. So if you do choose to make it open, it will be listed along with all of the other affiliated OSU OSF projects. And now I'm gonna, so this right here is the dashboard. This is showing you kind of what are all my different projects. Actually, I forgot, I wanted to do something before I went in and actually got our hands dirty making a new OSF project. And that is just to show you what one looks like so you kind of know what to expect. So this is a live kind of existing research project on OSF. And there's a few things to notice here. Nice, neat URL, everything that you create in OSF, your profile, your project, your components are going to have that 5-digit URL. The DOI to the published version is nice and prominently listed, but this also houses the preprint. So if someone didn't have a subscription to this journal, they could read the preprint. It's got information about the project, like the title, the contributors. You can click here to read the abstract down in this wiki. It's got, let's go down here, lots of different files added to it. So you can see they synced their GitHub here to the stimuli. And they have all of these different file types. They have some JPEGs, some R files, some CSVs. And then continuing on, we see the recent activity. So this says the last actions that people have done, what they did, when. And then continuing to go up, we have all of these different components. So they have 4 components here. They have data analysis, stimuli, and then this, which is the abstract. Also I have this citation widget here, and this presents basic information about this specific OSF project. So if someone does want to cite it down the road, then they can just copy and paste the citation from there. So that's what an OSF project looks like. Now I'm going to go back here, and this is my dashboard. So these are some of the projects that I've been working on. I'm going to create a new project, and I'm just going to call this OSU sample project. And create it, and go to the project. All right, projects on OSF can be basically anything. So they could be an individual research study. It could be, you can make a project for an entire lab and have each component be different running experiments within the lab. You can create components and components and components. You can link out to components. So a project could be for a line of research. If you're working with multiple people spread out all over the country, this is your central location for that line of research. It could be a large multi-site complex project. It's really built with the basic logical structure that you build out from there. So this is our blank project page, and again, you can see up here, it's private by default, and I have to actually take action to make it public. And I'm going to go into a little bit more depth on the different elements. So the list of contributors, because I signed in with my OSU account, it's automatically affiliated to OSU. And the first big tool on the page is this wiki. Now this too, because Open Science Framework is so loose and flexible, this can be whatever you want it to be. It could be a collaborative editing space. It could be like a to-do list. It could be an introduction to the research project. If it's your lab site, it could be an orientation to the lab. Welcome to the lab. First thing to do, create an OSF account. Next thing, here's how I'll show you an example later. It could be a README space to direct people around the project page so you can talk about what the different components are. And it could be different things when the research is ongoing versus afterwards. So while the research is ongoing, it can be a kind of orientation. Here's what this page is all about. And then afterwards, it could help potential users figure out what's being shared here. So that's really open-ended. And underneath the wiki is a section for files. Now, as you build out the components of your project, it will create directories here, and that's where you upload the files. Again, you can add any file type to OSF, any size under 5 gigabytes, and a significant number of them are rendered here in the browser. So like CSV files or R script files, or even some more complex file types like 3D models in STL, Word files, PDF, you don't have to download to view, which is another huge benefit because not everyone wants to constantly be downloading tons of files and adding them into their drives. You can view it here in the browser. And many of them you can actually edit in the browser as well. So talked about file size restrictions. We talked about the recent activity. And then components are the primary way that you add a logical structure to your OSF project, and we'll be creating some of those in a second. Again, with this brief URL, they call that a globally unique identifier. And that's always going to be 5 digits, and you're going to have one of those for each one of your items. You as an individual also have a GUID. So here's my profile right here. So you can see I'm 2H9JM. And it's up to you how much information you have here. You can sync it with some of your other accounts if you like. You can add employment and education data. But this will show you what all of your components are and the different projects that you're working on. So this too can be shared. You know, if it's something that you want to show people some of the research that you're currently involved with, you can send that. But the real advantage to assigning these brief URLs to a project, to a component, to a file is, so with collaborators, you know, you may just want to send them, have a look at this data and send them that link, and it goes directly to that data file instead of, you know, having to attach it or having to have them log into a Google Drive or map to a network drive. You just send them that brief URL. And also afterwards, when a project is shared in public, you can use these brief addresses in a CV or on a lab website, or for example, if you're publishing and you have a plot, you can add a caption there that says, go to this URL to download the data underlying this plot. Or if you wanted to include other plots that the publisher didn't want to have in there, but you think are really valuable, you can say, for more figures, click on this link and you can see a whole list of those. So, all right, I'm going to pause there. Does anyone have any questions? Alrighty, so let's add some logical structure to this project. I'm going to add a component. I'm going to call this component data. I'll go to my new component. Actually, let me go back here. I'm going to add another component and add another component. There we go. Materials. Oh, I also wanted to point out that you do have the opportunity to assign a license, a different license to a different component. And that's one other thing I don't think I mentioned yet is you don't have to make every single thing in a project public. So you can make one component public, you can make a component of a component of a component public and everything else private. So maybe you have some data files that you have some raw and messy and processed ones that you don't want anyone to see, but then you have a nice clean one that's ready for people to look at. So you can hide the raw data files and just show the public one. This is an example of that. Or maybe you upload your minutes, like your meeting minutes or your discussions, and you don't want anyone to see that. You can keep that private too. So you have a whole lot of flexibility in terms of what you show and what you hide. There's also this, if you click on the More button, you have to click on that. They have these different categories. So that can be a shorthand for your lab partners to say, oh, here's the data or the instrumentation component. So this is my materials. I'll just call it. All right. So I'm going to go to the new component. So right now I'm in the materials component. You can see it looks exactly like a project page. There's nothing special about it. Again, it's a very high level logical structure. Components have all of the same tools and capabilities as projects. The only difference is you can see the main project name up at the top above the materials, and it's got that little arrow up here on the toolbar letting you know that it's one level down. Again, you can do as many levels down as you need to create a structure that works for you, and they can have different settings from the main project. Any questions about that? So I'm going to go back to I'm on the main sample project page. Let's talk a little bit about contributors. That question came up earlier. So you can use OSF to organize your own research materials. So let's say you go back to someone and say, oh, this is great. This is going to get us all organized. And they say, no, I don't think so. I'm good with what we're doing. Well, you can keep your own stuff organized here. Like you can add your own version control if you don't want to mess with GitHub, or if you have different versions of a Word file or a PowerPoint or a text file, you can keep everything organized for yourself here. But if you do want to add collaborators, you can do that, and they've made it pretty easy. You just click on Add up here. You can't search by email address for privacy and spam reasons. I'm going to search for Kay here. I'll just search by last name, and she's the only one. So if you have projects in common, which Kay and I do, it will state that there. If a person has filled out any of their personal details, it'll also display there. And if the person doesn't have an OSF account, you can click this Add as Unregistered Contributor, and it'll send them an email saying, hey, this person wants to do something on OSF with you. Why don't you create an account and join us? But if they're in the system already, which Kay is, you can just click on the green button and add her. Then you have some very important decisions to make, and I'll go through those. Bibliographic contributor, that is this person going to appear in the citation? So if you're not ever going to make it public, that really doesn't matter. But if you are, if it's just maybe a lab assistant who's not going to have a credit on the final OSF project, then you would uncheck that. But it's checked by default, which means that that person's name will be listed on the citation. And then the permissions, and there's 3. The first is read. So again, everything is private unless you give someone some level of read access. So, and you can change that based on the component. So for example, you may want to give someone permission to add and modify data, but not look at the research protocol, or any combination of things. Again, it's flexible to allow you to change those based on the component. Read write is obviously, you can, let me see where I'm at here. Allow them to access the project and make changes to it, edit files, add and delete content, and then finally administrator, which you are by default. And the administrator is the only person who can add contributors or change the permissions that existing contributors already have. So I'm going to go ahead and make Kay an administrator. And then here's where you say, well, what will she be an administrator over? Or what will she have read-write access over? And so I'll just go ahead and give her access to everything and add. Okay, now if I go back to the main project page, you can see that Kay has been added there. And she also, because I included her as a bibliographic contributor, she now is added in the bibliography, and we'll get credit in the citation. Any questions? Yes.
So let's say we graduated from OSU, will it be still valid for us to sign in with our OSU email, or should we modify it?
So you will, yes, that's a great question. You won't be able to sign in using the institutional sign-in, but you'll still have an OSF account. So that's a great point, that as you're graduating, you'll probably want to come to your own profile and change that email address and make it your current forwarding address. Yeah, that's a good question.
So once you share, protocol or anything like that, unless and until the collaborator is made administrator, he or she cannot make it public, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Only admins can make the decision to make anything public. Yes, correct. So I'll go into this wiki editor here real quick. The wiki editor is in Markdown. So if you already know Markdown, you can just use that language already, but it also has a boldface, editor here. And as I said earlier, you can use that however it makes sense for your project. It's also version controlled, so you do have to go down here to the save button to commit it. But I'll go ahead and put that. Markdown also has bold. Doesn't make any sense, but it's there. And yeah, it's a useful tool for general knowledge organization around a project, like a running summary or subjects for discussion. And especially if you have very complex structures, each component is going to have its different wiki. So I'll go into the data component right now. So you can add text here saying, this is where the data was collected, this is what the different versions are, and if you're adding components in there, maybe there's multiple phases to a research project, and you want to use that wiki to provide information about what each of those are. So now we have a structure, but we don't have any content. So let's add in some files. You do that down here. You can see that each one of these components, the sample project, the data component, and the materials component, each of these has its own OSF storage. And that's the way that you upload files directly into OSF. So I'm going to click on the OSF storage for the sample project. And once you do that, this little bar here appears. And I'm going to choose upload. I have a few where's my files? Here they are. So I'm just going to select them all, and it will upload them in parallel. And yeah, that's pretty straightforward. So here they all are. It's pretty easy to move them around. You can just click and drag. So I didn't have a component for code, but I'll just put it here in the data component for now. Questionnaire, I can put that under materials. I'll put the raw data here under storage, and that's it. Now I want to show you the preview because that's kind of cool. So I'm going to click on this. This is a R file. Just click on it. So not only can you preview it, but because it's an R file, you can edit it here. And I can just click on edit it, and it will be version controlled. And you can see it's got nice R syntax highlighting. So it's pretty real. If you actually are going to write R code in the browser, which I don't know if anyone would do that, but you can at least copy paste into there. So now I'm going to save that. So this is a different version, but because I modified it in OSF, I'm going to go now to revisions, and you can see it's got my first version, it's got my second version, and it's got some checksums. So you'll be able to pull up the old versions if you need to. One kind of bad thing about this that's different from GitHub is that with Git, you can add a comment to every commit and say exactly this is what was changed. So this doesn't support that. You can add a general comment up here and say like version 2, you may want to, if you are going to use this system as your version control, you may want to establish a protocol that says anyone that makes changes has to say for version ID 2, I changed, so-and-so. And then comment that, but that's going to be the comment for like this entire thing, not just that commit. Does that make sense? Okay. So as I mentioned, each file, I'm going to go back to the script. Each file has its own unique identifier. So I can directly link to any of the files. All right, the version control is done automatically. So with these, if you edit them in the browser, it will automatically give it. But if it's like if it's a Word file, for instance, and you don't modify it in the browser itself, but you modify it on your own computer, if you're saving it into the same place with the same file name, it'll automatically version control it. Did you have a question?
I was getting into that. So how does it actually sync with your version in offline version?
Yeah, so it wouldn't automatically do that. The only way to do it would be, I have my Microsoft Word document, you make the changes on it, you come back in here, you upload it, and it automatically changes. I'll just show you.
Do you have to upload each and every file individually, or is there a way to just sync your repository?
There's no way that you can sync OSF to the files on your machine as it's currently running in the same way that you can do with Git. Yeah. So you would have to go into my OSF folder, questionnaire. Yeah, I'd like to use Word to open up a Word file. Oh, this was blank. Blank document, save it, close it, come back into OSF. It's not going to check that I added anything. You can check it out. So if there's a lot of people working simultaneously and you're afraid like, oh, what if I add it and someone else adds it? Again, it doesn't have this really sophisticated merging that GitHub does. But if you're concerned that someone else is going to modify the file while you're modifying it, you can check it out. And that means while you're working on it, only you can upload the next version. So I'll check this out. Oh, wait, no, I want the Word file. It doesn't matter. So I have it checked out. Now I'm going to go back into my data. I'm going to come here. I'm going to upload an analysis script. It's got the same file name. It's in the same place. So it's going to automatically update it. Now if we go into our analysis script, see it had that little icon that indicated that it's checked out right now. Go back into it, check it back in. Now if I look at my revisions, now I have 3 revisions, so it did it automatically. And I didn't make any changes, so it's not checking it, but still it's a nice way of keeping things in order. Any questions about that? That was a good question.
Couple of comments.
Yeah, please.
So because he added me as a contributor, I've been getting continual emails about the changes.
All this rapid activity.
Yeah. So if you're part of a collaborative project, you know when people are working on it, and it tells you what's going on. The other thing that I was going to comment on is, I don't know if you noticed when he had the two contributor names up there, they each have a colored icon beside them. And so when you start looking at your version log or your change log, the icons show you who's, visually who's doing what. Kind of cool.
A nice shorthand so you can quickly tell. Yeah. Well, thanks, Kay. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Just a quick question about uploading files. Can you do folders instead of files when you can do?
I don't think you can upload an entire directory, but you can Control A and highlight all of the files in a directory and upload.
You can have a directory and subdirectory.
Right.
Do it all.
I don't know, actually. Let's see. I'm gonna just click on my directory. Yeah, I don't think so. You're gonna have to go through and select and deselect the subdirectories that you don't want uploaded. Yeah.
But you said there's a way to sync this with GitHub.
Yes.
Then you can do things in GitHub
And then it will change in OSF, and we can take a look at that if y'all. Do y'all want to see that? Do y'all use GitHub? Would it be interesting to see me sync GitHub, or would you rather see me sync like a Google Drive to it? Which one? Google Drive? Okay, I'll go ahead and do GitHub. So the way to add add-ons is this. I'm going to go back to the sample project, and I'm going to click on add-ons here. And this will show you all of the different add-ons that they have. They also have citation add-ons. So if you use Zotero, you can upload all of your RIS files here, and it will actually format them in a citation style automatically within the browser. And it's got hundreds of different citation styles loaded in there that you can just then copy and paste into a document. So that's pretty cool. For GitHub, so again, here's all of the ones that they support. You go to the module that you want to connect to, you click enable. This will tell you what you can and can't do, and that's dictated by the terms of service by the provider and what the APIs are capable of. So read through that and really understand what you're going to be doing, because you want to be careful. If you connect like a Google Drive, first of all, you're only going to see your own Google Drive folders. But once I connect this particular Google Drive folder to my OSF account, and I add a contributor, and I give that contributor read-write permissions to that component, they'll be able to see, add, and delete my files. Now, it will be version controlled, which means you can recover it, but you want to be very cautious when you're working in collaborative teams about syncing your own services and what sorts of permissions you're giving out. There's no indication like on the Google side of things that someone went in and made a change. It will be documented in OSF, but not in Google. But on the flip side of that, if you don't have a Google account, or if you don't want to mess around with logging into Google, this can be a good way of having read-write permissions into a Google Drive folder without having to log into Google. So I'm going to confirm these terms for my GitHub, and then I'm going to import my account. Are you sure? Why not? And okay, so since I've already logged in, this is my page. It already knows me. I don't have to log in with my GitHub credentials, but typically you would. And these are all of my different repositories. So I can just pick one. And again, only I can see this right now on my end, but once I add it and save it, and I can go, okay, settings updated. I think that's gonna be there. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, so here's that specific GitHub repo. It's got, you know, my documentation. It's got my code. And look at the code, and now Kay can also look at this code. She can check it out. She can modify it, and so on. Any questions about that?
If she modifies, does that automatically change?
Mm-hmm. It does. It gets pushed to your master branch in GitHub. Yeah.
So you imported your GitHub
Mm-hmm.
OSF,
Mm-hmm.
your GitHub account is closed. Oh,
No, it's still,
okay.
like if I go to it, github.com. Here it is, and yeah, I mean, my repositories and everything are in there. So
So it's like just a duplication.
yeah, it's a way of providing access if you have files in there and multiple different people, if you don't want to use GitHub, or even if you make an agreement and say, we're gonna still use GitHub for all of our versioning and coding, but we're just gonna link to it here as a way, you know, so I can send this URL to someone if I wanted to say, you know, take a look at this. So it's just another means of branching out from all of the different systems.
Also in GitHub, when you're choosing that repo, you're only giving permission to her to work with that particular repo and not other repo.
That's right.
How that work in the Google Drive? Do you have a
Same.
specific file or
Folder. Yeah. Or file. If you only are uploading a file, in which you can do, then just that file or folder, whatever. It'll give you the options. When you look at your Google Drive account, it'll have all of your different folders, and you'll be able to drill down and say, only show this folder, the rest keep private. So going back to my sample project here, and I can take this stuff that I have in here and I can move it too. So I can upload this onto the OSF storage folder if I wanted to too.
This is different from components, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I thought like when you gave permission to Kay,
Yes.
one of your components.
I gave her permission to this entire project.
Project.
Yes. And all of the components.
But like if, let's say like, you know, if you gave permission only of the materials component,
Mm-hmm.
then how would this look?
So,
Oh, here then.
yes. And then she'd be listed here. And then if I wanted to, if this was the component where I added my GitHub repo, rather than, I added my GitHub repo to the whole project page, but I could have just added it to the materials or the data component and set the permissions for that one. Okay, any questions? We're right at the hour mark. I do want to show you a couple of live examples that are really interesting uses of the system, but does anyone have any questions before we leave this one behind? Yes?
This might be just a personal test, but do you see any advantages using this over GitHub? Except the space limitation?
Yes, because it's a central location for everything, and it's I think it has more. It's a lower barrier of entry, so not everyone is comfortable using the GitHub environment. It allows for adding lots of different types of documents and interacting with them in the browser in various types of ways. I don't know. Does anyone else have any ideas of?
Well, one of the things that I could see is, you know, if you're doing a large coding project or another project, you may want to do the majority of the work in GitHub. But then, once you've got your code established and ready to use, that's when you then would want to hook it into your OSF files or project, so that then it's accessible for the project.
Let me show you a few examples of how OSF is used now, and then maybe that will shed a little bit more light on why it's valuable as opposed to just using GitHub. So I'm just one of the things when you make an OSF project public, it's indexed by Google. So I can just Google this study, Daniel Lakin's effect size. So it's got some of his publications, it's got his Google sites, it's got his actual publication, and the third link down is his OSF project. And so you can see here he has lots of things. He talks about any updates he's made to the study. He links out to the full press, the full article. And then here's all of his files reproduced so that people can download that and see. So this is a great example of an individual project for a research page and sharing out the products of that and not just the article. When it comes to preprints, that's something to keep in mind. OSF also has a preprint server where you can upload your preprint. The thing to think about is most journal publishers allow relatively unlimited sharing of the submitted version of a manuscript. Many of them also allow you to share the version after it has incorporated changes from peer review. But sometimes that's after an embargo period. And almost none of them allow you to share the final publisher version. So if you are using OSF to share out the preprint of the research report, just be cautious that you're complying with the copyright policies of the journal. So this is a research project. Another example is, I'm going to go back here. A lab. I want to show you an example of an entire lab. Here it is. So the way that they use this is they have a component here for a new experiment template. Let me show you this wiki first. So this is a sample, and they say, when someone new joins the lab, here's the protocols. When you start a new experiment, you can fork a project, just like you can in GitHub, which means that you can take a given component or an entire project and make a copy of it on your own. So this has some instructions for getting oriented to the lab, what happens when someone leaves, what are your options, and whatever helps you make sense of your lab project. Then they have here a new experiment template. So what they say here is start all new experiments by forking this section. So this is the structure that they want everyone to conform to if they're starting a new experiment in the lab. And they have a built-in data component that's got a raw data component that they'll expect you to fill in, a component for analysis scripts, manuscripts, protocol, and the instructions for how to build out your project from this template. They have a component there for lab meetings, so every time they meet, I'll go ahead and click on, oops. Lab meetings, so they have different folders for fall 2016, spring 2016, components for research. So you can see how this can build out. You can also link a component from here. So rather than actually creating the component, you can link to a pre-existing component, make updates on that one, and since all this is a hyperlink, it'll change from there. Yes?
So if this is public, can you make a component and then make that one component private?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you have very robust ability to make, you can have a huge project and have one single thing that's like my preprint, you know, or my PDF, say you're going to a conference and you are making slides, and that's the only thing that you want to be public, and you make a component of a component of a component, and you put your slides in there, that can be the only public thing, and everything else can be private if you want. But that slides, I mean, that's another point, is when you're going to conferences and you're talking to people and you want to be able to share kind of what you're working on, that's another reason to start with this from the outset, because it's a good way of sharing everything that's in progress. So this is a lab example. Any questions about that? I also wanted to show a humanities example in case we have any humanists in the room. So this is just a basic humanities / social sciences project. So it's got different documents, it's got transcripts, computer generated data. So again, you can use this for any type of research project, doesn't have to be just in the sciences. A few years ago, there was a study to try and replicate 100 relatively high-profile studies in psychology, and they documented everything here on OSF, and it's loading right now. So they called it the Reproducibility Project. So they have all of their analysis, their post-publications. I mean, this one is really built out. Inside each one of these is a replication of a single study. So if you go into that, they're going to have all of their report, their data, their study materials. It's highly organized because they were trying to set a model for what reproducibility should look like. So while they were doing reproducibility studies, they wanted themselves, their study, to be reproducible. And they're doing the same thing right now for cancer biology. I don't know if I linked to it. Yeah, I did. So this is an ongoing study. I think they've gone through, I don't know, 10 or 12 studies so far, but it's all being documented here on OSF. Let's see, I think that's all I really wanted to show you as a, oh, there's one more very interesting, unique case. DOIs, you can assign a DOI to a project or to a component if that's important to you. So this one has a DOI assigned to it, but it's going to go to a OSF project. And this was an interesting use case. These behavioral addiction specialists used OSF to modify their definition of what behavioral addiction is. And they did that entirely in this wiki template. So this is the current state. The most recent version is what it always shows. But if you go up here under wiki version and you go down to, say, number 10, this is what it looked like at that point. And this contributor said, I think we should change life impairment to functionally impairing nature, and this is why. So out of that, they got not only a publication, so a new definition of behavioral addiction based on input from multiple specialists in the field. So they're talking about the definition here. And then they also wrote up a study or a commentary here about the process, where they talk about 3 commentators disagreed with our 4th proposed exclusion criterion. So they talked about that process. So you can think about lots of different ways that you could take OSF because it is so flexible. I think I'm nearing the end of the comments that I wanted to make. Does anyone have any questions? Yes? Yeah. Yes, I can. Thank you. I didn't mention tags. These are just a way of increasing discoverability. So with that one that I Googled, Daniel Lakin's effect size, and I'll go to his tags. So he has effect size there. You know, it's basically just a way to increase the likelihood that people will be able to find your study. Yeah.
That is like global. It's not just specific to my account, right? If I click that effect size, it will show everybody's work.
Everyone who has tagged it with that term. Right. So let's look at that.
Is there a search function?
Yes. So this, to answer your question, this is every study that's been tagged with effect size. And lots of stuff. And you can search by up here at the top, and you can search all of OSF. So you can say psychology reproducibility. And what's nice about that is you can also see the different types of files they have here. We didn't talk much about preprints or registrations. Those are 2 very specific types. And we have 20 minutes, so if anyone wants to talk about that, I'm happy to. But files, projects, users, the search searches through all of them. To search through just your own, you would want to go into My Projects. Let me see here. You have a dashboard. I can't remember where my search is. Oh yeah, you can just use that. And that searches through everything. Any other questions? Okay, well, if you didn't get a donut or if you want another donut, feel free. I have some cards I'll leave here. Feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions. You know, I don't mind even if it's something I've already gone through. It was a lot of information, so don't be shy and say, I can't remember how you did this. I'm happy to sit down with you and help. All right, thanks very much, everyone. I appreciate y'all coming. Thanks.